So, when you look at the United States, there's what's called a Bill of Rights. The idea of it is to explicitly list what every person is entitled to for being alive on U.S. soil. Well, every U.S. citizen, that is. However, the Bill of Rights is superseded by anything that can be commoditized and sold for profit. The popular three are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, if we look at the idea of a right to life in this country, on paper, you have the right to life, but this does not include the right to shelter, a right to food or clean drinking water, no right to health care unless you can pay for them. And we can do this with all three. What good is a right to liberty if I have no right to property or housing and no right to safe travel? What pursuit of happiness can be expected from someone who has to fight for survival every week as they live paycheck to paycheck due to living expenses? So really what we see is that poor people have no rights in the United States. Now, someone outside the States may be wondering, well, how can this be? With so many taxpayers, aren't there programs to correct this? And the answer is yes, but the citizens don't choose the direction of their taxes, and so every assistance program is underfunded because in reality the role of the taxation is for the citizens to foot the bill and cover any sunk costs incurred by the US government or its investors. Noam Chomsky speaks at length about this. Now, in order for an individual to receive assistance from such programs, they have to be living under the poverty line, meaning the amount of money they make is not enough to cover the basic needs. So let's say someone has a minimum wage job because the company doesn't want to pay laborers any more than they are legally required because it's bad for the bottom line. This worker is also hired part-time because the company does not want to pay for medical benefits they would be required to if they hired the worker full-time. So this worker can choose to get a second job, which is what many people do, or to live with the assistance from a government program. So let's say, for the sake of simplicity, in this example, they get $200 allowance per month for food as a result of living in poverty. Now, let's say they get a chance for a promotion or a raise that increases their income by $100 a month, and that puts them above the poverty line. And therefore, they are not eligible for the $200 food allowance. The worker can choose to either make $100 less since they lose the allowance, or refuse the raise or promotion, which is what many do. Because they can't afford to lose that allowance, this forces many poor people to stay poor, even if they are very skilled and experienced in their profession. To exacerbate this, if the worker quits or strikes or applies pressure to change policy within the company in any way, they will be easily replaced by someone equally as desperate to make money, and therefore attempt to earn their human rights. And so the worker has no real power to protect themselves from this situation. To exacerbate this even further, we need to look at the capitalistic rhetoric ingrained into the culture. The majority of the population has adopted the ideology that with hard work, anyone can achieve financial security. What this implies, however, is that if someone is not financially secure, it is their fault for not working hard enough or smart enough. And therefore, poverty is their own fault, which is in this environment, as we've discussed earlier, means not having access to human rights is their own fault. Now, I want to provide several examples because many people in my culture believe they are advocating for personal responsibility when in fact they're advocating either starvation, crime, conscription, or wage slavery. So higher education is, again, not a pursuit of happiness right because university is a for-profit industry. University's largest selling point in this country is that it's the salvation from poverty. Almost every student must take out a huge loan in order to pursue higher education. These loans are so large and have such high interest payments that a former student can be paying them back for 30 years or longer, as most payments are almost entirely interest, and therefore they're barely touching the principal, which is the actual amount of money borrowed, which I want to put in loose quotes just because it sounds too friendly of a word when discussing the topic of predatory lending. Now, one example of my culture's ideology about this is it's financially irresponsible for someone to take out a loan they can't pay back, therefore they shouldn't go to university. But as discussed earlier, if you don't make enough money to have savings and you can't accept promotions because they will exclude you from needed assistance, how will you ever save enough to get a degree? The obvious answer is you can't, unless you're young enough to join the military, which can cover some or all of an individual's tuition. This is not a coincidence. So children who found themselves environed in food insecure households learn firsthand the aches and violences of living in poverty, or so close to it that money is perpetually a survival stress. So these children understandably feel a psychological need to escape poverty as a result of its traumas, I should say. And when they reach adolescence, their options are clear. Do what my parents do and work for a company that underpays and underappreciates me, yet still struggle with poverty for the rest of my life, or sell myself into the military so I can have a chance at knowing a life where food in the fridge isn't a weekly worry. This is why there are military recruiters in inner city high schools repeating the sales pitch about honor, freedom, and a shot at a good life. Under this model, the United States will never have to draft soldiers, because there will always be a new influx of desperate young boys who see risking their lives in government territorial disputes as their only non-criminal option to escape poverty. Another example of my culture's ideology is, if you think minimum wage is too low, then you should get a higher paying career by getting a degree. Aside from see the previous paragraph, the only comment I need to add to this is the humorous irony of these popular opinions being held by the same individuals. To believe anyone can work hard enough to be a self-made success, but people choosing to work for minimum wage are foolish and should go to university, but only if they can afford it, is kind of the same as saying either you have enough money to buy your way out of poverty or you don't. And since you obviously don't, because we're talking about poverty, then you should just stay poor forever. To further illustrate how entrenched the corporatist narrative is in the country's culture, there's been talk of the possibility of implementing student loan forgiveness for the past 5 years or so. Given these previous paragraphs, you would think the entire culture would be on board with this. Not the case. Many feel that forgiving debt is unfair to the people who successfully paid theirs. To phrase this in another way, in order to expose how anti-progressive it is, many people feel that a policy that would make the lives of others easier than their own should not be implemented.